Good morning, party people. Richie says you just can't get enough. I'm not sure if that refers to me as a glutton for punishment or if it refers to the viewers as a glutton for punishment. Good morning, folks. So it's 6 a.m. here in San Diego. Well, I'm like 2 minutes early, but you know, what's a couple minutes between friends? And so, hello, Amsterdam or the Netherlands, technically. I'm not sure if you live in the Netherlands or Amsterdam or the Netherlands. J. Cole, viewers! I know, right? Can you believe it? It's unbelievable. Near Reading. Oh, near the legendary John Skeet. Good morning, SQL Dev DBA. Tiago says, I live here in SD, but I'm from Brazil. Oh, okay. That's, I think I would like San Diego right now better than Brazil, just in terms of the weather. Greg, good to see you again, too, as well. Got a lot of the regular people in here. Jesus, that initial camera shot, you need a $5,000 Apple display. So, us being at the end of our lease, so we were looking at our leases up in like January, and us being at the end of our lease makes, 20 miles south of Amsterdam. That makes me really hold off on buying stuff. It's amazing how effective that is because we're still not sure whether or not we're going to be in Iceland for a few months after our lease is up. So tentatively right now, we're supposed to move to Iceland. So we stay here for January and February in order to teach a few classes for the live class season pass. And tentatively, we're flying out for Iceland in, I think it's late February, but Erica and I were just talking about it yesterday because we just don't know. Very cool. Very cool. 5 games. Wow. And that one's indoors. Oof, geez. What do y'all do for food when you're in that long? Do you have to pack your own lunches? How does that work? But yeah, so because we're theoretically moving to Iceland for like 3 months, that stops me from replacing this monitor. I hate this monitor. I bought this on Black Friday because it was a really good deal. I am very cheap with monitors. I tend to buy a monitor, like I want a USB-C monitor and I want it to be widescreen and all this. Oh, it's better than good. It's one gig pretty much everywhere. So yeah, Mike, 1 gig pretty much everywhere. Like something like 85-90% of Iceland is covered by gig fiber. It is amazing, just fantastic. Richie brings a bunch of stuff. Oof, geez. There was, I could go off on another tangent there. Saw a car yesterday with a leather-wrapped Yeti cooler. A leather-wrapped Yeti cooler. What on earth? But Twitcher says, I'm not getting announcement emails since the subscription stopped. Unfortunately, I can't do tech support for Twitch, obviously. I don't quite know what's going on there. I do know that I'm not going to go back into the affiliate or partner programs just because I really don't I'm not interested in making money on Twitch. I would much rather reach out to as many people as I can across YouTube, Facebook, and all that kind of thing. So for today's stream, I'm going just open Q&A. If there's anything that y'all want to ask about, I am going to, if you don't ask questions, look at a poll that I asked on Twitter earlier this week, and I'll show it to you just because it's kind of funny. So I asked a poll out here on Twitter this week because I was curious what people would say. So if I have a query that doesn't have an index on reputation, I'm hitting the users table at Stack Overflow. But if I have don't have an index on reputation and just a plain old clustered row store index on ID, do these queries get different plans? Go give me the top reputation or the max reputation. Can these get different plans and how? And I'll talk about that. Tiago says, Brent, can I give you a suggestion? Make a video or live explanation, explain scenarios to get a job in SQL Server. If you go to brentozar.com and search for how to get a job, I've already got a ton of material about it on there. So not the DBA you're looking for, said Max, I don't know if it's right, just a guess. I was curious to see what people would say. And so 30% of people thought Max would usually get a better plan, but it's interesting how the things just kind of broke out across there. It's almost even, except for top one usually getting a better plan. But I love that like 30% of people weren't sure. I think I have my audio set too high and I think it's kicking out is what's going on there. There we go. Um, so like 30% of people aren't sure. When I ask these kinds of questions, this is what I look for in a good distribution for a blog post, that people really don't have any idea. And like 70% of the audience is wrong. So nothing, if I don't get questions, I'll go dig into those. DFFF. No, I like that. I like that theory, but no, they both use. They don't really need the stats, but it is kind of interesting. So let's see. DFF says, from YouTube says, why does SQL Server periodically lose its mind, consume 99% of the server, and stop responding? There are really three questions inside there. Why does it lose its mind? Oh, I could go on for days about that. Why does it consume 99% of memory? That's by design. It actually wants to consume as much memory as it can, because your users, when they query data, SQL Server doesn't want to have to pull the data up off of disk. It wants to be able to just satisfy those queries from in RAM. So using all of the memory is by design. Why does it stop responding? That's yet another question. So, and of course the answers to each of those are different. But Surjit says, demerits of implementing a resumable index on a 10 terabyte table. So the problem with resumable indexes is whenever you start creating one, you're not allowed to create or drop any other indexes on the table. So you got to be on a mission to work through that as quickly as you possibly can. In most cases, it doesn't usually make sense unless you have absolutely no other options. You said it has frequently bulk inserts and weekly archival, and then my reindexes never finish. I don't think reindexing is a good idea there. I think what you want instead is partitioning. If you frequently load up a whole bunch of data and archive a whole lot of data, that's what table partitioning is for. Look into that instead, and you'll be much happier with that than online index creations. Now, you said it's a 10 terabyte table. Partitioning will not be a cheap task. Partitioning it will involve a lot of work. This is usually the kind of thing that people sketch out and do a whole entire project around. A Lion asks, Brent, what do you think about Azure Synapse? If I remember right, that's the product where they've changed the name half a dozen times in the last 10 years. I think that one used to be called Data Allegro, then Parallel Data Warehouse, then Azure SQL Data Warehouse, then they called it something else, and now they call it like Azure Synapse Analytics or something. I don't think that the name changing constantly is going to help build the brand. If you were trying to build your own reputation as a blogger and you were pulling the Prince act where you were saying, all right, everyone, today my name is Annabelle. All right, everyone, today my name is Belinda. All right, everyone, today my name is Christy. People would be like, why don't we just give them some time to get to know themselves? And when they come back, maybe we'll be able to remember what their name is. But it just really doesn't make any sense to me when they can't even get the product name stable. I don't think that I would want to invest my own career in learning anything about it. The ironic thing is I think it's probably a pretty good product based on what little I saw about it, but I don't trust the product planners to stay focused if they can't even keep the name right. Sai over on Facebook says, how do you handle millions of ad hoc queries from the application? Very carefully. Santa says, question, what would be your choice of disaster recovery for a database of more than 1 terabyte with the disaster recovery site being on different regions of the US? So generally speaking, you can either replicate the data inside of SQL Server or you can replicate it at the storage level. If you have exactly the same storage, then it's usually easier to replicate it at the storage level because the storage can replicate in both ways really easily. If you don't have the same storage, I'm a huge fan of log shipping. Log shipping works really well. It's bulletproof, you name it. Albert, no, that's pretty well far beyond what I would want to cover inside a stream. That's where you pick up an internals book, get a SQL Server internals book and go through those. Kenny says, oh, Kenny, that's interesting. Kenny on YouTube says, a colleague told me that they didn't want to use cross-database queries because of performance issues. I'm not aware of any he's saying, I'm not aware of any performance issues with cross-database queries. Any experience with that? I think your colleague is winging it. I think they are totally faking it. I have never seen any issues with cross-database queries. Now, I've seen queries be slow. I've seen cross-database queries be slow. But the reason that cross-database queries were slow had nothing to do with the fact that they were cross-database. Now, there are a couple of things that are a little different there. Cross-server queries, those suck the big one. Those are pretty bad. SQL Server's linked server queries, we have all kinds of performance issues with those. The other thing that he might have been thinking of, your colleague might have been thinking of, is if you were working in Azure. If you had Azure SQL DB, cross-database queries are essentially cross-server queries there. But if you're talking about conventional SQL Server box product, cross-database queries, I think your colleague is kind of winging it. Mayuresh says, good morning. A friend of mine told me to have a GUID as a referential key for every table in the database, in addition to having a primary key in DDD. I don't know what DDD is. Dungeons and Dragons, maybe? Says, what do you think of adding a unique constraint on that referential key in terms of performance? Anytime someone's trying to give you advice on something, ask what problem they're trying to solve. I don't know what problem your colleague is trying to solve. Now, you might actually have a problem where you need something like that. Maybe none of your tables have clustered indexes or unique keys or primary keys. Maybe they're just heaps and SQL Server's having to shuffle through all kinds of random data. But what I would ask for, though, is what's the problem that they're trying to solve and what different behavior do they want to see afterwards? Because just in general, would I tell someone to change their tables? Nah, changing tables sucks. Adding columns to tables is really like a slow, long-running kind of problem. I don't want to just inject that kind of work in unless I know that there's going to be a payoff afterwards. Pilot Coder says, what if they want to create the problem? Or sometimes, Laser, sometimes your coworker is the problem. Maybe they're the problem that that is popping up there. All right, let's see here. We got all kinds of good questions coming in this morning. So let's see here. Next up, Jan says, do you have any experience using materialized views and their benefits? Yes. So materialized views are great when I want to pre-bake reporting data ahead of time, when I want to pre-bake sums or maxes across millions or billions of rows. I'll show you an example. So let's say that I've got a query over in the Stack Overflow database, and I'm going to use the big Stack Overflow database, the larger one that's out there, and I'll zoom in so that you can see the code a little better. I'm going to say I want to find the most popular posts at Stack Overflow. So let's say select post ID, and we'll just do top. We'll do top 100 post ID count star as votes from DBO, votes group by post ID, order by count star descending. If I run this query, it's going to go find me the top 100 most popular posts. It's going to take absolutely forever because sometimes people will say, we want an up-to-the-minute report and it's got to be exactly transactionally consistent. Make it work. And queries like this take absolutely forever to run. Well, what you can do instead is, so you see that this query took in all 22 seconds in order to run. You see the time counter there on that final operator. 22 seconds to run, and to pull it off, it had to scan. I've got an index for this already, but it had to scan across 150 million rows, grouping them all together. Well, there's not a great way to make that fast unless you start doing that pre-grouping ahead of time. And that's what index views let you do. So if I say go create or alter DBO view votes by post with schema binding as, put a view in there because that's what I need to go create. Select post ID count big star as votes from DBO votes group by post ID. Go. So first I'm going to create the view. Then I'm going to say create unique clustered index, CLIX on, DBO view votes by post ID. So then what this does is it builds a copy of that view to disk permanently and keeps it up with every insert, update, or delete. Then if you want to get really fancy, I'm actually going to do that. If you want to get really fancy, you can even index on top of that. So I can say create index votes vote count on DBO view votes by post votes. So when that finishes, I'm going to go ahead and recreate my, or when it finishes, I'm going to go create the non-clustered index. Here comes the non-clustered index. And I'm going to make one tiny little tweak to that query. Instead of doing count, I'm going to do count big. After this index creates, here's the magical part. If I'm lucky, I don't have to change my query. If I'm lucky, SQL Server will notice that I have an index on this view right here and that the view kind of matches up with the query that I'm running. 3, 2, 1, execute, boom. It's done immediately. If I go look at the execution plan, it's done in less than 1 millisecond. Now, of course, there are gotchas and limitations with that, and I teach much more about that over in my Mastering Indexes class. Go Master Indexes. I have a whole module just on indexed views and filtered indexes. So that's over in the Mastering Index class. That's module 3.1, filtered indexes, indexed views, computed columns, and partitioning. So there we go. All right, so let's see. Next up, let's switch back over here. Dave says, before I joined the firm sounds like was it the John Grisham book? Before I joined the firm, there was a mandate to make everything table valued functions. Are you kidding me? Oh my God. I've been battling performance issues for the past year. Oh, I bet you have. What's your view on making some of these TVFs views and materializing them into real tables? You know what I would do is just change them into inline functions. Search for TVF inline function, and if you could make it into a view, then you can make it into an inline function. And the beauty of making it an inline function is it'll immediately go faster than as opposed to a multi-statement table valued function. Otherwise, if you want to change it to views and like move those into tables, you're going to have to rewrite all the calling queries, and that's going to suck. What you probably just need to do is turn them into inline functions. VTOL Freak says, any way to get a row modification count on an external table to another SQL server? What? An external table? Because you said right now I'm updating my external stats on a schedule. Oh, are you got to be using big data clusters, I'm guessing. I don't know off the top of my head, but I'll tell you, assuming that you're using big data clusters, I'll tell you who I would ask. The person that I would ask is Mohammed Darab. He says Polybase, yes. So SQL Server. So this guy is the one person that I know in the community who's actively using stuff like Polybase and big data clusters. So if you search for Mohammed Darab SQL Server, he is very friendly, very nice guy, and does all kinds of community activity. So there you go. Next up, let's see here. Oh, because I got the browser open. Fraud asks, do you have any reason in 2020, like new versions of SQL servers, that you should or shouldn't use linked servers? Yes. If you search for Connor Cunningham distributed query SQL bits, If you search for that up there, Connor Cunningham Distributed Query SQL Bits, this is one of the architects over at Microsoft who was very deep in the SQL Server engine. Now I want to say he works in Azure still these days, but he has a totally free session out there explaining why performance sucks and what you can do about it. Because linked servers are so much of a huge problem performance-wise, I'm just not a fan of doing them. I'll give you the one big example. When you run a linked server query, SQL Server has to go get the data from the linked server every time. There's no caching whatsoever. Doesn't matter if the data hasn't changed, doesn't matter if the data is read-only, SQL Server has to still go get it from the linked server every time. So you just kind of know right away that's not going to scale. Let's see, next up. Saeed says, I can't get my replication done. Me neither. Next up, S. Nasir asked over on YouTube, what will be your choice for an alternative to Service Broker? Either Amazon's simple queuing services or RabbitMQ. If you just Google for open source queuing solutions, there are a bunch out there that are totally free. Amazon's simple queuing service costs like $1 per million messages. I mean, it's just an insane number. It's so much cheaper than SQL Server. It's not even funny. Tajareb says, what is your opinion on Merge? It's completely broken. So Merge, if you search for Aaron Bertrand Merge, not Marge, but Merge. Merge. Aaron has a great post up there with all of the problems on SQL Server's merge statement, most of which aren't ever going to be fixed. So the thing is, whenever you see Microsoft ship a feature in order to be competitive with Oracle, like Oracle has a feature, so SQL Server builds a feature, Microsoft just builds the feature to be checkmark compatible, and then they walk away. And they don't fix the bugs, they don't fix the performance problems. The list of bugs on there is epic. Merge will let bad data in despite foreign keys and constraints. It will stop good data from coming in, saying that it violates constraints and check constraints and foreign keys when it actually doesn't. It causes deadlocks. It's been marked as closed as by design. So after you go through that, that's just kind of the end of the road for me. They're just not fixing the bugs, so game over. Let's see here. Tajareb says, are indexed views automatically updated in SQL Server? Yes. Fernando says, hello from Mexico. Should I rebuild a heap if I can't add a clustered index, as the table has more than a... So what I would say is, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And you'll often hear me say that from whether it's talking about my training classes or consulting. I'm like, all right, what's the thing that you're trying to solve that users are complaining about? If the problem you're trying to solve is forwarded fetches, then yes, you should. But if you're not having forwarded fetches, I'm not sure that I would just go rebuild that heap for no reason. Let's see. Next up, got all kinds of good questions coming through here in the list. Pythor says, I inherited a database that has several tables within indexes that include every column in the table. Is there any rational reason to do that ever? Yes, if the database is read-only. So I have some clients where, like Think Data Warehouse, where they just load stuff every night and then they just read only all day long, and they have lots of time overnight to do their loads. Why not put every column on every index? If you have the luxury of really long windows overnight to load your data, you're just making selects go faster. Now, granted, your backups are going to suck. Your index insert updates and deletes are going to suck. Your checkDB is going to suck. Your index maintenance is going to suck. You're going to be under memory pressure because the database is going to be large. All these pages are going to be fighting for RAM. But there are legit reasons to do it. It's just rare. Just rare. Aniket, what a beautiful name, Aniket. That's really cool. Aniket on YouTube says, while moving a clustered index to a new file group, If I use the delete existing parameter, that makes it much faster. How does it work differently in the background? You know what I would do is just look at the execution plans. That's the same thing whenever I do when I'm doing query tuning. If I want to know how things are different, I'll just go look at the execution plans to go see what the differences are. Let's see here. Let's move this over here so it's a little easier to see. Mike says, I have several tables that are heaps that were created by the BI team. Currently, I have a script to rebuild these indexes to resolve the forwarded lookups. Would it be okay? No. Yeah. Would it be okay if I just added a big int identity primary key to resolve this, as long as it's a clustered primary key? He says, what is the downside? The downside is, and I'm going to just speak theoretically. So first, just theoretically, what if your new primary key, your new clustered index, causes inserts to go slower? What if the inserts into the heap were actually really fast, and then the inserts with your primary key caused a problem? Do I think that's going to happen? No, but I just come from I've come from a point of defense. Like any change that I make, choose your character. Oh, I watch way too much TikTok. Any change that I make, I'm always worried that people are going to pin the blame on the DBA for something. The other thing it could break is select stars. If all of a sudden people were doing a select star and different columns come back, it could break your inserts if people weren't naming the columns that they were inserting into. So I'd just be careful to make sure you're solving a real problem. I do like that you're on the track of trying to fix the forwarded lookups, and I do like that you're rebuilding them. But I don't think I've ever had a point in my career when I've been able to add a clustered index on a brand new column without getting the other team involved first and saying, hey, is it okay if I do that? Coming down further. Santa says, is there a difference between count star and count one? Let's go see. So let's go fire open our, I don't know why I opened GitHub desktop. That was entirely the wrong one. Let's go see, select count star from DBO votes, and then select count one from DBO votes. And while we're at it, select sum one from DBO votes, and select my personal favorite, count chocula from DBO votes. Now to gauge the success of each of these, I'm going to go do set statistics IO on just to see the number of logical reads that they're doing. And then I'll go run each of these, including the actual execution plan. What you'll find is that SQL Server is going to use the narrowest index, the smallest index possible, in order to accomplish this goal. But when you throw in things like indexed views, so here, notice that these two use the index on votes by post. That's my indexed view, whereas this guy uses the table. So here, because my indexed view is on a count big, this ends up using my aggregate and it goes way faster. Look at the times on these, just like 40 milliseconds. Where these, that is a sum one, because SQL Server doesn't know that count star is like not the same as sum one. SQL Server's like, sum one? I've never heard of that before. I better go scan the narrowest index on the votes table. So in theory, these should be roughly the same, but as soon as you start diverting and doing anything even slightly different, you'll end up with a different execution plan. How about count chocula? Is SQL Server smart enough to interpret that one? It is. So here was our count star and count one. Here's count chocula. SQL Server understands that a count is the same function. Now, if I had an indexed view on sum, then the sum would be faster, but it gets you a rough idea there. The other thing that you're probably asking at the root of this is, does the count star need to hit the clustered index? And clearly the answer is no. We didn't hit the clustered index here, even though I did a count star. SQL Server optimizes away the count star. So there we go. I'm always a big fan of doing, whenever I can do a quick demo repro to show it, I'd rather just use a query to show it. Let's see. Mr. TCS8 says, what's your opinion on CLR functions in newer versions of SQL Server? So CLR gives you the ability to write like C# code inside the SQL Server. So I think it's amazing because then that way you can spend $7,000 a core to run .NET code, whereas usually it would be free to run it on an application server. Does that math? Oh, actually, that's a terrible idea. Oh my God, why would I pay $7,000 a core to write .NET code? Oh my, that's awful. Who the hell would do that? So now, joking aside, where it makes sense is where there's something that you have to do on a row by row level inside the database server, where it's faster there, and you're willing to pay $7,000 a core. Laser's seen me in action repeatedly recently. Let's see here. So PilotCoder Laser says, when I was talking about table valued functions, I'm pushing for inline functions, but I find that most of the times a function is not just a select and can't be converted into an inline. The only reason that I said that was the person who was asking about converting their queries said that they wanted to use a view. If you could put it in a view, then that way you could just put it in an inline function and you wouldn't have to change the calling query. But I am 100% with you in that most multi-statement table valued functions really are multi-statement. The only reason that I pushed for inline there was just because they said they were going to use a view. Not the DBA you're looking for. Good to see you again, said a colleague of mine. I love that. I like what you're doing there. A colleague of mine used a single stored procedure in every report he ever wrote. He would just add a new data set with an if statement to specify which data set to return. My question is, how hard should I hit him? Well, look, you're here because you like performance tuning. Sometimes you need a coworker who produces really bad code. That way, you look like a superstar. What you should do, in fact, is you should follow them on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, everywhere. Because sooner or later they're going to get fired, but you need to find out where they go next. Because that way, wherever they go next, you can go get a job. And when it comes time to do the interview, you can say, I know that you hired Alex. Alex and I have a really long history. I love making Alex look good, and Alex will agree. Alex may even ask that they hire you. And then he'll get fired again later, and you can just keep repeating the process. Mossy Moss says, over on YouTube says, hi Brent, do you have some good practices for ETL? I don't. I have so much respect for data warehouse people, and so what I do instead is I point people who do data warehousing work to a couple of my friends. The ones that I would point you towards, I'll go fire up a web browser, entdna.com. So entdna.com is Enterprise Data and Analytics run by Andy Leonard, who often shows up in here. Andy Leonard often shows up and watches my streams. Andy Leonard is also on Twitch. If you search for, so that's entdna.com. If you search for, I think it's twitch.tv Andy Leonard, I believe. Hot diggity, that's exactly him, and he's kind of big inside there. It looks like he's a pirate in some sense in there. And he's pretty friendly. I'm not sure if that looks friendly or not, but he's actually very friendly. So he's a good one to go watch, and he streams as well. Another one would be, what the hell is his name? Tyleris Data Solutions. Why is it's going to drive me crazy that I can't remember this guy's name? I have his coffee mug in my, this is Tim Mitchell. Oh, whew. So Tim Mitchell, yeah, and J. Cole knew it, so good. So yes, that's both of those people are really good. Tim does a lot of presentations at things like SQL Saturdays too as well. Next up, what do we got over here next? So let's come back over here. Tejarep, Tejarep says, after reading the Aaron Bertrand's post about merge, I started worrying. All of my data warehouse has around 100 stored procedures with merge. Yeah, that's, it's also, there's never been a better time to get a new job. I say that, but it's not really true. It's probably not the best time to get a new job, but yeah. Oh yeah, Jay Cole's class. Oh, that makes sense. Vikas, welcome to the club. Thank you. Ibrahim says, how much of a performance boost is observed with index views when compared to normal views? Can the same performance be achieved by indexing the underlying tables? It's a great question. I bet you asked it before you saw my demo just there. In the demo that I did several minutes ago, I actually had indexes on the underlying tables, but still aggregating 150 million rows together and running sums across those is very CPU intensive, and an indexed view just makes that go away ahead of time. So before, the query took like 30 seconds, after it took 30 milliseconds. So that's a great example of indexed views and how they can smoke regular indexes. Next up we have, Gary says, Gary Bargsley, good to see you, says, how would you troubleshoot memory pressure on the SQL Server with the first responder kit? I'll show you. So first, let's put our SQL Server under memory pressure. To do it, I'm going to go write a query. I'm going to say drop indexes table name equals users, just to get rid of all of the indexes on the users table. Then I'm going to go run select count star, or no, I'm going to go do select top 1000 star from DBO users, order by reputation descending. So when I run this query and I tell SQL Server, go find me the top 1,000 users by reputation, I don't have any indexes at all. So what's going to happen is that SQL Server is going to have to sort all of the rows by reputation. It's going to be very CPU intensive, but it's also going to be very memory intensive. Let me go back and run it again. SQL Server is going to ask for a big, ginormous memory grant in order to do this, because SQL Server doesn't really understand the nature of this data. So SQL Server says he wants to get like a 2 gig memory grant or higher in order to run this. So, and I've got him in 2019 compat mode. Let me go change that, because that's going to actually, in a hilarious way, it fixes itself, but then it ends up backfiring later. So let me switch back to 2017. So this query is going to want a whole lot of memory when it runs. Let's go through and run it a whole lot of times. I'm going to fire open SQL query stress. So let's say, I believe I've got it under C Labs, SQL query stress, and paste that in there. So SQL Query Stress is an open source load generation tool. I love it. It used to be originally written by Adam Mechanic. These days it's maintained by a guy out of Norway. And it's open source, so it's a little flaky. Not that commercial products aren't a little flaky. I'm going to run that query across 10 threads. Go. Now, the tricky thing about this query is that each one that runs is going to want 25% of my RAM. I'm no data scientist, but if I have 10 queries that each want 25% of my RAM, that doesn't add up. So right now my SQL Server's under extreme memory pressure. How do I find out? One of the first ways that you do it is SPBlitz first. So if you run SPBlitz first, what this does, I don't want the actual execution plans. Let me go turn that off. What SPBlitz first does is it takes a snapshot of a whole bunch of DMVs, diagnostic data, waits for 5 seconds, takes another snapshot, and compares what was different inside that time span. It doesn't start a profiler trace. It doesn't start an extended events trace. It just says what's been going on in the last 5 seconds that may cause me problems. And it gives it back to me in a prioritized way. So for example, here it says, I have memory grants pending. Our server is so starved for memory, queries can't even get enough RAM in order to start. So when you see this, for example, this would be one way that you would go and troubleshoot it. And inside that URL, it also gives you more information about how you approach the problem. In this case, what I would want to do is I would want to go find the queries that are getting the biggest memory grant. And I'll go ahead and cancel that load test. SP Blitz Cache is the query that looks at your plan cache and analyzes the top 10 most resource intensive queries. Sorting by memory grant lets me find what are the queries that have asked for the largest memory grant. So here you can see number 1 with a bullet. Go select top 1000 star from users, order by reputation. It'll tell me what the problems are with this query. Hey, it's got an expensive sort. We're having to sort a whole lot of data because we don't have an index on that. And if you go further across, it also gets you things like how much the maximum memory grant was. This query is getting about a 5 gig memory grant, and it's using about 1.5 gigs out of that. So when I'm doing memory tuning, I'm often looking for queries that ask for a lot of RAM but don't get very much. Now that quick walkthrough right there was an example of how I would troubleshoot queries that are asking for a lot of memory. There are lots of causes for SQL Server asking for or needing to burn through lots of memory at a time. We go through those over in my Mastering Server Tuning class. So if you go over to Training, and then Mastering Server Tuning, this class is really all about how you go about tracking down those problems, how you use the first responder kit scripts for it, and so forth. Okay, next up, let's see here. Tajareb asked a question about index views. You can go run an experiment on that pretty easily to go find out, though, so I'll let you go run an experiment. Oh God. Fraud asks, a department wants to have SQL mail set up to send application client mails via SQL Server. I've been pushing back to get generation on the app server, but do you have some good views or arguments to deny? Oh, yes, I do. Tell you about a time where a developer had a bug in their application, and instead of sending just one email to a customer, it was stuck in a loop and kept sending emails every second to that customer, and it kept doing it for all of our customers. A, we ran out of space on the SQL server, and B, that developer took down the Exchange server as well. The worst news was that developer was me. So I don't ever want anyone to have to go through that. So I would just say, if you're going to go take down a server, let's not make it the database server. Let's make it the application server instead. Then, of course, you always have the standard licensing thing. Why would we spend $2,000 a core for standard and $7,000 a core for enterprise to send email? Just doesn't make sense. And of course, this is why you hear different advice from me than you hear from a lot of like MVP bloggers. MVPs are like, you can use SQL Server to store your MP3s, to store your PDF collection. You can use it to run linked server queries to Oracle. You can use it to run Google Analytics. And I'm like, really? Really? Just because you get it for free as part of a licensing thing doesn't mean that your clients do as well. So there's so much disconnection there. Not that he looking for says he uses Count Dracula all over his code after seeing me use Count Dracula and Count Chocula. Dinesh says, I have a database with just one data file. Now I want to split that into 4 files so that writes can be faster. Nope, it's not how it works. It's not how it works. Now, you could test it, but do it in a development environment first so that you get that eye-opening experience, but just putting it into 4 files doesn't make writes faster. Mike, that's awesome. Jesus says, did Joris get an increment this year? He did, yes. He does pretty well. Miss Scolzy. But what a neat name, too. Americans have such boring names. We have names like, well, I don't want to use a name because there's going to be an American in here. But one of you is an American. We'll say Bob because I haven't seen a Bob in here in a while. But then like Miss Colsey. Oh, that's amazing. Miss Colsey, which is probably like Polish or something or Eastern European. Hey guys, I wonder, is there anyone who's seen an actual database where the developers use tsql for testing? Oh, Bob the Lobster. Oh, damn it. Oh, there's 2 of you. Oh, geez. See, but so you know what? Your real name is probably like Roberto. You know, it's something interesting. See, Mike, you were actually the one I was thinking of. I was thinking of Mike. And I was like, oh, I can't say that either. But have I seen an actual database where developers use tsql for testing? No, but I have seen other people say that they have. And so it's kind of like Bigfoot, right? I've never actually seen Bigfoot, but I know other people who say that they've seen Bigfoot. Yeah, I have the same kind of thought about that. The reason why it's fresh off my mind is Nico Neugebauer out of Poland. Nico has this Columnstore index script library. Brent is an example, but nobody's name is Brent, and the baristas can never get it right. I don't know why they always think I'm Brant or Brad or whatever. But so Nico Neugebauer's Columnstore index script library uses tsql for testing, and I took one look at that. I checked in changes to his code this week, and I took one look at tsql and I was like, nope, not happening today. I am out of here. So Nico is Portuguese, yeah. Let's see here. What else we got here? Contact. Contact asked a question about CDC. I don't actually know anything about CDC. I don't know jack about CDC, but post that on dba.stack exchange because other people will know. Hungarian. Okay, that makes sense. Santa says a barista clearly doesn't SQL. So I'm getting into my elevator. My building's elevator, well, there's like 10 elevators, but I'm getting into one of the elevators a month or two ago. I get into the elevator and I have a mask on, mind you. I have a mask on. And I'm going down the elevator and someone gets in at a floor and they go, Brent Ozar? What? I'm like, yes, but how? Because I have some followers on Instagram, but it's not a lot. And I would have figured Instagram because it was a local San Diego person. And the San Diego person says, oh no, I follow you on Twitter and all that. I work at Microsoft. And I was like, I'm not sure if I should be happy about that. And he was like, no, you're very funny. It's comic entertainment. I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. Tajareb says, have you tried clustered Columnstore on temp tables? It has improved performance for my colleague. Not sure when to use. I'm going to tell you a secret. I'm working on a Columnstore index class. I think it's going to be out in September, but I'm not entirely sure. I don't want to announce that publicly yet, though, because if I announce it publicly, then things could go wrong. But I'm hoping I'm going to have it out in September. Next up, Caroline says, like flashy things so you don't remember. Caroline says, I just jumped in. Sorry if this is inappropriate. I've learned to use persistent computed columns to avoid conversions in my where statements. I've implemented some and the execution plan looks the same. Is it possible that SQL Server chooses not to use the computed column? You have to index it. The only way it helps is if you index the computed column. SQL Server can't just use the column by itself. It's got to have an index on it as well. Is it possible that SQL Server chooses to ignore the index? Yes, because for example, imagine that you hit the tipping point where too many rows will match, that he would have to do too many key lookups. Then that's the same problem that you would have on a regular index, like will it cover enough of the table? Next up, coming way down here, let's see here. Oh, Tony asks, Brent, if you were starting your career now, would you pick SQL Server or something cloud-based like Databricks? Okay, me personally, if I was going to start my career right now, I have so much respect for people who are having to start their careers right now because it's just such a terrible time in the economy to come straight out of college or whatever, especially being loaded down with a ton of debt. That would be very scary. However, you have so many cloud things at your fingertips. If you want to build something, you don't need a DBA, you don't need a sysadmin. You can go so far up in the cloud without having to buy your own hardware or rent space. It's amazing. It's just so incredible. When Richie and I started building SQL Constant Care, I was just like, I'm going to whatever extremes that I have to go to not have to buy a server, to rent a server, or to patch a single operating system. I don't want to patch anything. So I think that if anything, I would start again in development, but I wouldn't want to go into regular development. Like I wouldn't want to go into computer science. I find that really boring. What I would want to do is talk to my relatives and my peer network and try to find a solution to build that I could build myself and go start a business, because there's never been a better time to go build something amazing just on your own. There's so many resources available to you. Okay, next up, Bondar says, I have asked previously about string split and didn't get a solid answer. Ask your question though, because I don't know. Here's the thing, there are a lot of people here. It's not just you. There are like 110 people on the stream right now. So I can't tell what your question was or when it was. Ask your question. And iCode to Play says 96. That's just on Twitch. Then we also have YouTube and Facebook live streaming all at the same time too. That's why you see those little icons when the questions come in, like Tony's over on YouTube. And just in case you're curious about my metrics, because you want to measure yourself against me, I see how that is. Let's see here. Next up is Anaket says, do you think traditional DBA's role is changing with cloud or Azure SQL buzz? Yeah, I think that the job duties that sucked are going away. Like I never want to do backups or corruption checking or patching or troubleshooting why the cluster failed over. And the cloud takes care of a lot of that kind of stuff. You'll notice for those of you who have followed me for a really long time, like I've been blogging since 2000. Some of you who've been following me for a really long time will notice that I used to be a production database administrator. I don't blog about availability groups anymore. I don't blog about failover clustering because I'm like, that is just boring as hell to me. It's not fun. It's not interesting. So the cool thing is that now DBAs can focus more on the fun parts of the job if your company actually goes up to Azure SQL DB, managed instances, etc. So that's absolutely wonderful. Michael says, any tips for a DBA starting with change data capture? Nah, I don't use it at all. Sorry. Next up, go down a little further. Hanny says, how are you? Good to see you again. I just want to make sure that it's doable to upgrade Standard Edition to Enterprise Edition. It is. You have to do an edition upgrade in the setup process, like when you go through the setup process. If you search for setup upgrade in brentozar.com, I think Kendra wrote a post walking you through it. I can't remember if it was me or Kendra. One of us wrote a post walking you through it, and it hasn't really changed much in years. Upgrades, you're okay. Downgrades, not so much. Downgrades is when you start to run into problems. You know, I should probably stop here to do fresh espresso too as well. I'm scrolling down. MRTCS says, I'll ask you just because it popped up on the screen. Have you met Bill Gates? No. He was supposed to speak, and also Steve Ballmer, I think, was supposed to speak one of the years that I was an MVP and we were at the MVP summit in Redmond, and I never got the chance to go see them speak. I have nothing but respect for anyone who can build a business like that. Remember, Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates left college and started that company, and in their lifetimes, just in their lifetimes, they went from being just college kids, with decent money, not fantastic, but decent money, more than certainly I had out of college, and built these 10, 50, $100 billion empires just for themselves. It's just utterly fantastic. All right, so let's take a stop and take a quick bio break. We'll take a 5-minute bio break. I'll go refresh my espresso, go hit the loo, and I will see you back in here in 5 minutes. There are still lots of other questions I'll still go through and continue to ask. If you have questions that you want to see get in there, feel free to post them in. It doesn't matter whether I'm talking live or not. I'm just going to go down through that entire list, and that'll be all of today's stream. So I'll see y'all back in here in 5 minutes. right, welcome back. CDC was me. Okay, cool. All right, cool. Let's see what else we got here. So Swaglow says, best place to start for an intro to performance tuning and becoming a competent database administrator. Why? There's an excellent industry resource, and that would be barentozar.com. Bandar on YouTube says, would you recommend setting exact abort on for applications that don't handle errors properly? Dang, that's a good question. Oh, that's such a good question. Bandar, you should be proud of yourself. Not that the rest of the questions were bad. They're just Bandars. That's amazing. That's really good. So what I'm going to do is say error handling Erland Summerskog. Oh, Erland has a fantastic set of blog posts about that exact question. So if you search for error handling Erland Summerskog, both of these are like 60 pages long. They're huge, and it goes into all kinds of details that Bandar, because you asked that excellent question, you're going to love stuff like that. So go check that out. They're very, very good stuff. Do I know any of it? Not at all. Because I never have to write new code. Like, nobody just hires me to write new code. So... Next up we have, let's see here, Mahesh says, we have a database with a 3 terabyte size and a single data file. Would it make sense creating multiple data files and move a few large tables to different file groups? So the whole thing, oops, I can't emphasize this enough, is know the problem you're trying to solve. What's the problem you're trying to solve? What do you think is going to get better after you do something like that? Because boy, when you pass 1 terabyte, you better be sure that what you're about to do is going to make a big improvement. So start with that. What is the thing that you expect to measure that's going to get better? What's a perfmon counter or a DMV counter that you think is going to get better after you make a change? And then go test out your hypothesis in development. And it can make a difference, but it depends on what problem you're trying to solve here. I have one client with 10 terabytes in a single data file, and storage is not their problem. Koala, no. Phenomenally, no. Great question, but the answer is no there, period. Next up, let's see here. Nada says, can I just ask you, sir? Remember, you've got to put a question in. You just can't say stuff like that. Oh, Shane says... I'd love to use tsql, but I can't get it to mock queries across databases or system tables. Yeah, that's the reason I didn't use it for SP Blitz, Blitz Index, Blitz Cache, all of those things. Because it can't mock up system DMVs, I would really have to rewrite SP Blitz and Blitz Index and all that from scratch to use dynamic SQL and swap out names for the tsql type objects instead of the system objects. And at that point, I'm going to introduce more bugs than I'm going to fix. Let's see here. Subrat says, would you share some important tips for deadlock issues if we face in a production environment? Yes, and I'm going to write them down because this is going to, there's going to be several here in a row. So for handling deadlocks, I did good. I stopped my stress test. That would have been bad if I hadn't. So for handling deadlocks, here are the things to think about handling deadlocks. So 1, use SP Blitz lock to find them. After you find them, 2, have enough indexes to make your queries go fast, but not so many indexes that delete, update, and insert operations go slow. 3, work through tables in the same order, like always parent child or always child parent. Doesn't matter which one you use, I just want you to pick one order and always work through them in the same way. Get as few locks as possible, commit, and get back out. So I think of that as if you were going to go shopping, for groceries, what you wouldn't do is you wouldn't go get a cart, go up to the checkout aisle, put it in, say, I'm going to begin a transaction, everyone. Now, if you don't mind me, I'm going to go get some bread. Okay, also, I need kumquats. hey, I find that watermelon are nice this time of year, people would beat you senseless. They would grab your cart and throw it into the gutter. So it's the same thing in databases. Go get everything that you need from the shopping mall first, then begin tran and make your changes and get out. Like selects are not allowed inside transactions. Get that over with ahead of time before you need to do that. Okay, so that's a good starting point there. I'll let you take a screenshot of that while I take a sip of my tasty beverage. Ah, espresso, fantastic. All right, so now let's come back over to the next one. Let's see what we got here. Myresh says, beside Management Studio and Century One Plan Explorer, do you have any other recommended tools or plugins or extensions for app devs? That's a really good question. I don't because I flip from one client to another very quickly. I'm not usually allowed to install third-party stuff. I will tell you that if I was a full-time app dev again, I would probably be using Azure Data Studio. I love Azure Data Studio for writing new queries because it's got decent integration to GitHub. The execution plans are not quite as good. There are third-party plugins for that. They're not really great either compared to Management Studio's plans. But I would probably invest my time more in Azure Data Studio. Plus, too, it's open source, and the team has been really responsive to things like bug requests. So. But the other thing I would say too is if you're stuck in SSMS, which isn't bad, but if you're stuck in SSMS, the thing that I would probably also get is Redgate SQL prompt because it's burned into my memory like a lot of the keyboard shortcuts for that, like Control KY for reformatting everything. They make it really easy to set your own formatting templates. Plus, who can forget KY? Because I think of it like makes my code slick, like KY jelly. I'm probably the only one who thinks that that's appropriate to say on a webcast. Cape Moss says, what are the cons of RCSI and which of your classes covers it? Mastering server tuning. I put RCSI stuff in mastering server tuning because when you change isolation levels, you have to think so much about things like TempDB's capacity. So it's much more of I would consider a server level change even though you changed it at the database level. SQL Dev says notebooks are a great feature for demos. They are as long as you don't need execution plans. Notebooks don't have execution plan support. Otherwise, if notebooks had execution plan support, I would be in there tomorrow. Like every class that I taught would only use Azure Data Studio. Even if it was crappy plan support, I would still probably do it. David says, do you think SQL Server 2019 big data clusters are going to change the future data landscape? No. Because I don't understand why in the Sam hell you would want to spend $2,000 to run linked server queries. Now, having said that, I know it's going to get market adoption. I just don't think it's going to change the data landscape. I think it makes sense for companies that have a lot of SQL Server expertise and they have data scattered all over all kinds of systems and they want to run queries in SQL Server and touch all those other systems. I just don't like linked server queries. And that's essentially, and Microsoft gets really angry when I say that. They're like, it's not linked server queries. It's much bigger and more elaborate and expensive and harder to implement, but it's not linked server. Linked server queries are easy. These are hard. What were we trying to sell again? You know, so I'm like, I'm not quite sure about that one. Let's go down to a few more. Let's see here. Going through. Lots of talking, but no question, which is cool. Devesh says, oh, Kurt, yes, thank you. Devesh says, we're seeing latency on 2 data files of 4 terabytes each. Could it be the size of the files? No. Could it be because of unnecessary indexes? Maybe. Do we need the files to be on separate disks? That's a great question. Unfortunately, that level of detail, especially when we're talking about multi-terabyte servers, is really where I go more into consulting or my training classes. We cover that issue in mastering server tuning. So if you want to learn how to do it yourself, go to my Mastering Server Tuning class. If you want me to just do it for you, go to my site and click on Consulting up at the top. Either way. Dinesh says, is there a way to find memory usage by SQL every 5 minutes? Yes. What you can do is log SP Blitz first to table. So what you can do, SP Blitz first has an output set of output parameters. So you can say things like output database name equals DBA tools, output schema name equals DBO, and then output table name equals Blitz first. Now I'm really only scratching the surface about what this thing can do. There are a huge number of parameters, but go hit the documentation for this. And basically what I do at a lot of clients is log this to table every 15 minutes. And I would strongly suggest every 15, not every 5, because there are things that we do on a regular 15-minute schedule basis that make a little bit more sense. But when you read through the documentation, you'll understand why. So I'm a huge fan of doing that. Is there anything that you can look right now and go back without having to install something? No, you're going to have to start logging something, but this is totally free, so love it a lot. Next up, let's see here. Shane says, I'm starting a new job and they want me to learn Postgres. You use Postgres for constant care. Any starting recommendations? Yes. A Curious Moon. So this is a cute way to go learn Postgres. It is a course that teaches you how to use Postgres by exploring Jupiter's moon. I think it's Jupiter's moon, Cassini. Just a beautifully done setup. I'm just stunned by how good this is. So I'll let you kind of take a look there at what that is. Like, how can you not love that? That's absolutely fantastic. Mr. TCS says you should have trademarked it. No. I stole that from colleges. Colleges have been doing that for forever. Like, professors would have office hours. I don't want you to think that I was good at college. I was not. But college professors have been doing office hours for 50 years, so that's just where I stole it from. Because they did the same kind of thing that I do here, is that they just show up and will answer questions from students. All right, next up. Traveling Snail says, we're going from SQL Server 2017 to 2019. Any hints or caveats? So many. 2019 is the biggest change, I think, in maybe 10 years, maybe longer, that it changes so many things. Just to give you an example, out of the 6 cumulative updates that have shipped so far, 3 of them have involved corruption bugs. So what I've been advising clients lately is actually, if you don't desperately need a feature that's in 2019, maybe you shouldn't go there. Maybe you should go to 2017 first. But if you do want to go to 2019, just be militant about putting updates in fairly quickly, and do yourself the favor of learning deeply about what's different, because frickin' everything is different. Batch mode execution on row store, indexes, adaptive memory grants, adaptive joins. There's so many things in that can totally hose your execution plans. Carthy says, hi Brent, when I have a table with lots of demographic information, in my app screens, the user can search by first name or last name or social or date of birth or combination of the columns. What index is best? I have a whole module on that. I'll show it to you. So if you go to brentozar.com/go/dynamic, so you'll go to brentozar. Well, here, that'll work too. brentozar.com/SQL/dynamic. I have a whole module around dynamic SQL pro tips, and you can step through this. Oops, I didn't mean to click on that link. I got clicked away there. I've got a whole session that you can run through with the Stack Overflow database to teach yourself how it works and to teach you how the indexing works. So that's over at brentozar.com/SQL/dynamic. It's totally free. Next up, Shahid on YouTube asks, what future track is best suited for a T-SQL programmer, data engineer, or data scientist? Oh, I love that question. So here's what I would say is, if you have a college degree in mathematics, in computer programming, one of those nerdy kind of degrees where you know algorithms, data scientist is a better fit. If you don't have a college degree in mathematics, computer science, then data engineer is a better fit. You might be able to get your first job as a data scientist just through your network. I'm not your network. Just through your network by faking it, by saying, oh, I can learn data science on the fly. But getting your second one after you've really burned through that first job is going to be tough. People are going to want a college degree in things like mathematics, data science, or computer science, algorithms kind of stuff, statistics. So for the vast majority of people out there, I think that data engineer is a much better fit. Next up, Sachin says, most of the data in our database is LOB, so large off-row text objects, and under some scenarios we'll have a lot of internal free space. We want to shrink it, which is time consuming. Is there a faster way to do it? Yes, and I wrote a blog post on it. I don't remember what it's called. So shrink, new data file site, brentozar.com. There we go. That's it right there. So if you search for my name and what if you really do need to shrink a database, I have a post on a better way to do it, which involves creating a new data file and new data file group and migrating your data over to it. And I explain how to do it, and I link you to scripts that will help you do it as well. Let's see here. Next, Mero says, laters learn how to raid. Don't waste your exposure. Okay, there's people who are like full-time Twitch streamers get really angry with me because they think I'm bad at it. They're like, you suck. You're not doing Twitch right. And I'm like, I make $1 million a year. You can kiss my rear end. Yeah, they just don't understand that there's a life outside of Twitch where you can do database consulting and do fairly well. Next up, let's see here. MRTCS. Okay, no, that's fine. Santa says, would you say that the CPU time and overhead caused by the with checksum database backup option is warranted? Some of my databases are large. Yes, because it's faster than doing CheckDB with physical only. So when people have large databases, they often say things like, I don't have enough time to check for corruption, which backing up with a checksum isn't as good as CheckDB, like a full CheckDB, but it's very similar to CheckDB with physical only, and it doesn't take that much extra time. So I'm a huge fan of it. I used to even warn people in SP Blitz, hey, you're doing backups and you don't have checksums turned on. But the support workload of so many people asking that same question made me pull the feature out because I didn't want to teach everybody here's what corruption is, here's what checksum does, and so forth. So that's why I pulled it out, but I'm still a huge, massive fan. And I would do it if it was my own databases. Let's see here. So many good questions today. Michael asks over in YouTube, or Michal, or it's one of those cool names that's hard to pronounce, says, what's the worst ORM you have ever come across? Oh boy. I can tell you the one that scared me the most. The one that scared me the most was a team that had a set of Perl scripts. Perl as in Unix scripting. Perl scripts to write dynamic SQL. Now that struck me as really unusual because a team that has a lot of knowledge in Perl, I would also think that they would use open source databases like MySQL or Postgres. So it was a really weird overlap of people who knew Perl and people who wanted to use SQL Server on the back end. And when I heard that, I was kind of like, this might not go well. But they were brilliant. They knew exactly what they were doing. I'm like, oh my God, this is like refreshing. And any changes that I need you to make, it's actually easy because you understand Perl really well. So that worked. Simon says, we do that. You might even be at the company because I still have that client, the one who does tsql and Perl. But I was like, that's actually not that bad. I do remember one that was that bad, but I can't talk about it publicly. But I will say this. If you're going to pick an off-the-shelf ORM, you should pick it from the largest company imaginable. Don't pick an ORM made by Bob's T-SQL and Tomatoes. Pick something huge, because if the company dies off and their ORM is never updated, It's at the core of everything you do, and ripping it out is going to be very expensive. I had one company who took a deprecated ORM. Okay, cool. And you would know if you were my client, because I teach the whole entire team. If the company was that took over a dead ORM, well, the ORM died while they were using it, and they're having to maintain their own ORM. That's like a worst case scenario. Let's see here. Windward Hive says, I wish I was smart as you. I wish I was as smart as I looked. Just because I talk fast doesn't mean that any of my answers are accurate. Supal DBA says, good morning. My question is, what happens if a query is coming in from the app and there's a timeout at the application side? Will the SPID and SQL Server get killed? So imagine for a second that you asked me, hey, Brent, I need you to go come up with a piece of art to interpret my query results. And then you went away and did some other stuff. I wouldn't know that you had crashed. The first time that I needed to talk back to you, that would be when I had discovered that you'd crashed. So if the application crashes and doesn't tell SQL Server, you can end up with the query continuing to run. If you're lucky enough that the application sends an escape command, and it's not called an escape command, I can never remember what it's called, but just tell SQL Server, hey, cancel my queries, then that you're going to be lucky enough that the query will get canceled. But I've seen a lot of application servers that just crashed and their queries kept on running as zombies. Carthy says, how do I calculate or predict the CPU or memory requirements for SQL Server? Oh, so you can't, this sounds so easy. It sounds like you should just be able to say, based on one workload, tell me how much power I need. But when your server's on fire, like it's just completely overwhelmed, how do you know enough CPU will make the queries fast enough for the end users? Because what you don't know is how fast a query needs to be for the end users. Some people need sub-second. Some people are fine with 30-second reports, for example. Will more queries come in if the server responds faster? There's one shop that I work with that literally the SQL Server is the one thing holding the rest of its business back. They're sending in queries as fast as they can, just sampling from another source. And if SQL Server went faster, they would just push more data into it. So unfortunately, this is why you're asking me, is because you've been Googling and you haven't found any good answers. It's because there aren't any good answers. And I wish I had an easier thing for that, but I'm not holding anything back. I don't teach that in a class either. I don't want you to think that you're missing something and I've got a secret hidden away here. I share everything I know, so. Next up, Rotnal says, I wanted to learn T-SQL. What's the best way to start? Just go get any T-SQL book. Because it's been the same for like 30 years, it's easy to start just in any of them. Oh, Sachin says, where do we get information about application side timeout queries? Search on Brenozar for timeouts, and we've got a post on how to set up extended event stuff to capture that. Greg says, Postgres, worth learning? Is it a time investment? I'd love to learn, but will I ever use it? Oh, that's a really good question. I'm going to talk while I go around and I turn down the air conditioner because it's gotten kind of warm in here. Is it worth learning? So the thing I would ask is does your business use it, or would they want to use it? And if that answer is no, then it's probably not worth learning. If you want to learn just for learning's sake, what I would do instead is I would go to some of the online classes about databases instead. There's a really good one, and this is, Carnegie, let's go look. Carnegie Mellon? Carnegie database course, and it's that CMU database group. Yes, they do a phenomenal job. There's an instructor in here who's just absolutely amazing and everybody raves about. This is probably a better way to go learn if you just want to learn out of curiosity, because it's also cross-platform. So if you're just learning to learn, go down that route. Let's see here. Next up. Contact administrator says, can this happen? During backup, DMLs get slow? Yes, absolutely. So if I search for backup timeout site, brentozar.com, I've written a blog post about that exact same thing. Totally, absolutely. The more workload that you have that's storage related will all absolutely cause timeouts. I've got great examples of that from especially VMs in Amazon and Azure. Next thing says, Tajareb says, I'm thinking about writing a series of blogs about the journey of learning SQL performance basics. Is blogging worth it at all in 2020? Think about the data community as a pyramid. YMCA. Think about the database server community as a pyramid. And this is really true of all technical disciplines, probably all disciplines, period. But if you think about the world as a pyramid, there are a whole lot of people at level 100, less at 200, less at 300, even less at 400. If you blog about introductory type stuff, you actually get the widest audience. The most of the audience out there is at the beginner level. What I would say is, ask yourself if you want to blog and what do you want to blog for. If you're doing it just for your own personal fulfillment, I blog because it's just very fulfilling to me. I really enjoy writing. I enjoy writing about databases. If you had me write about something else, I would have a bad time. And also like professional development type stuff. But if writing doesn't recharge you and motivate you, then it might not be a good approach. If you're more comfortable on camera or talking in groups, for example, consider live streaming instead. But there are lots of ways that you can give back to the community. Let's see, next up, Zvishnav says, Brent, at what point do you know you're good enough to start freelance work? What you do is everybody you interact with at your office, at prior jobs, you want to make it known to them that if they need help, they can come to you. If you get enough people from your former network, people that you used to work with going, hey, T, can you come in and help me with this thing? If enough of them call you, then you're ready. If no one calls you, you are probably not ready. There's probably something that they're not telling you about your personal skills, your professional skills, your tech skills, whatever it is. But if you can get someone that you know personally already to bring you in as a freelancer, then you're ready. But if you can't, it's time to crack up on. It's usually professional skills that you're missing. It's not the technical ones. Junior DBA says, I see most SQL Server DBA jobs asking for SSIS, PowerShell, and cloud stuff. Would it be wise to have these skills to grow as a DBA? So here's the thing. When you see a job posting from a recruiter, the reason why they're asking a recruiter is because they can't get anyone they know to take the job. If your company suddenly had a position available, I bet that they would ask you and your coworkers first, hey, do you know anyone that we should hire for this? But if they go out to the public and they hire a recruiter to go post ads, it's because no one at that company knows anyone who can do it or who would be willing to do it, or they don't want to tell their friends because the company is terrible. So we're already off to a rough start. Then the reason that they had to bring in a recruiter is here's what usually happens with those kinds of jobs. Someone takes the job, someone's working at a company, and they're working and they're being constantly given new stuff. Hey, I need you to do the SSIS. Hey, I need you to add this in PowerShell. Hey, I need you to build a data science project. And they're working as hard as they can trying to keep up. They give up and they go, and they throw it and they quit and they go get another job. Now, their manager says, we have to replace that person who left. Let's go build a list of everything that they were doing. And no one in their right mind wants that job. That's why that last person quit. So when you see a job with a big, long laundry list, we need someone who can wash cars, take diapers off children, big, long list of tasks. That's because that's what the last person did. Don't let that scare you off. If you really want that company, like if there's something about the company that makes you go, this is the place where I want to work, go apply for the job. But say, when you go in and talk to them, say, what out of these tasks, can you give me a rough idea of how many hours a week I'd be spending on each one? And then when they say that like one of them is only 1 hour a week, they don't really want an expert. They want someone who can just Google their way through it. So you don't have to be afraid of those big, long laundry lists. I will say, though, they're usually really crappy jobs. Let's see here. Bandar says, so I have a stored procedure that uses a UDF to convert a list to table. It's like one of those Rube Goldberg things. And it's used in the where clause. I want to replace the UDF with string split. What are the things to watch out for during testing? The problem is that SQL Server won't know what's going to come out of the string split until it's too late. Let's go do a demo. So, SQL Server string split command, string split SQL Server. Let's go get an example of it, because I never remember the exact, if it's the delimiter goes first, beautiful. It's the string, then it's the separator. So let's say, select star from DBO users where location in string split. I want to say this is how you run it. It's been a while since I've done this one. String split, India. Nope, that's not it. Okay, hold on a second. Let's go, select, oops, get this up out of here. Select string split, India, United States. So, whoops, strings. Oh, am I not in? How does that work? It's been a while since I've done this. Oh, for crying out loud. Comma, whoops, comma. There we go. There we go. All right, good. Okay, so location in, select star from, string split. Then let's copy this out of here. Copy and paste. All right, get that in, and then I'm going to go hit enter a couple of times just to get it so that I can zoom in on this and then run it and include the actual plan. So the problem is that SQL Server, there's two problems with string split. So here's string split way over here in the plan. The first thing that SQL Server does is go and split that string. First thing is that SQL Server has, oh great, Mossy Moss, yeah, that's Mossy Moss. Thank you, I appreciate it. Very cool. Woo. Always good to hear people are having a good time. So the first problem with string split, SQL Server doesn't understand how many rows are going to come out. He thinks that 50 rows are going to come out, which is fair. I'm not mad at him. He can't guess until he sees the string and actually opens it up. He's like, I don't know, 50. And it's always 50, regardless of how big or small the string is. Then he doesn't know what the contents of those will be. So he doesn't know what's inside of India or United Kingdom. He's like, I don't know, 100 rows are going to match? How the hell am I supposed to know what's inside there? So this is the problem with string split. Not only does SQL Server not know the number of rows, he also doesn't know what the contents are going to be. So if you want to have a better time with that, what you do is break this query up into phases. You start by saying create table locations. Yep, Stisham, or what is that? Station, yes, you have to do that separately first. So location name. And varchar, I'm going to guess 200. I don't know off the top of my head. Insert into locations, select value from, and then copy that out of there. Copy and paste. Get rid of that and move this over here because I believe that's what that is. Perfect. So then first we're going to go create the temp table. Then we can say where location in, select location name from locations. All right, now when I go and run this execution plan, now that I dump it into a temp table first, now the query has two parts. The top part, SQL Server still is 50 rows, has no idea what's going on, but that problem only has a real small blast radius. It doesn't break a whole lot of things. Now down here where SQL Server has to go guess how many rows are in the temp table, ta-da! Now he has absolutely perfect estimates, and he also has a pretty good idea of what's inside those rows. You see that he estimated about 48,000 rows are going to come back, and 65 came back. That's fantastic. I'm very happy with that. So if you're going to use string split, this is the way that you have to use it. You have to dump the contents into a temp table first, and then you pull the stuff from that temp table rather than referencing the string split directly. There you go. All right. Let's see here next. Caroline says, speaking of memory requests, so you can go test that with, I'll let you go test that one because that's pretty easy to go test. Caroline says, speaking of memory pressure, our production server is mostly yawning, but it loses the plan cache every night when we're doing CheckDB. If more memory isn't in the cards, I suppose there's no fix other than making the offending database smaller. You could run CheckDB with physical only, which just checks the checksums on the pages. It'll miss some corruption though. The other thing that some shops actually like to do is they like to offload CheckDB to another server. They'll go restore their production backups and run CheckDB over there. That gives you the two benefits of, one, it's testing your database, but it's also testing your restores, which is kind of nice. SQL Server 2019's licensing changes now let you offload that at no charge. This is something I think a lot of people missed. If I go look for SQL Server 2019 licensing change, high availability. Microsoft did a really good blog post explaining very simply what the new benefits are. So if you look for SQL Server 2019 licensing change, this is the post. You don't have to run 2019 to get this. This applies to all current versions that are under software assurance, which is their maintenance fee kind of thing. So it even works on older versions. It's just wonderful. It means there's no charge for offloading your backups and your CheckDB, which is fantastic. Let's see here. Next up. Phil says, is there any database activity monitoring technology would you recommend? For performance monitoring, there are so many options out there. I'm hesitant to name specific vendors, either good or bad, because inevitably what happens when I talk about that, because you also asked us follow-up security question. Hanny says the second node has to be HA only. It can't run queries is what he means, but that's covered extensively in that post. I think what Phil's really asking is security questions, because he also asks about hardening SQL Server. No, I tend to not do security work. It's actually excluded in my contract. I refuse to do any security work because the liability is so bad. And I've seen so many terrible, terrible situations where people do just incredibly dumb things, doing linked servers with high permissions so that all users have permissions to write to other servers. I've seen all kinds of SQL injections, you name it. Aniket, that's true. The licensing change gotcha still apply though. Let's see here. Next up, SavishNav says, how do I deal with CSV values stored in a single column? I know I can use wildcards, but that sounds like a terrible idea. This is usually when people denormalize. They denormalize it out into a separate table. But otherwise, there really isn't a fast way to do that. You really have to separate that out, or else it's very CPU intensive. Let's see. Gary asks, how do you keep track of what you've blogged? You blog every day and not duplicate. I've only published 60 and I've almost duplicated twice. I tend to Google first. I tend to Google about the topic before I write the post, just to make sure that there's not something out there that I would point people to. If there's a great post that I would point people to and I look at it and I go, that stands on its own, I just need to get that post more visibility, then what I'll tend to do is just put that in the weekly links. But if I look at a Google for something out there and I'm like, I don't really like the top 10 results, they're all kind of crappy, then there have been a lot of times where I've Googled and one of something that I've written has come up and I'm like, oh yeah, I did talk about that. Or I'll feel that I need to revisit a topic with a different approach. Shrinking databases is a great one. I talked about a different post that I'd used just earlier inside the same session for that exact example. Next up, going down further, let's see here. Jesus asks, do you have a real-life SQL injection issue experience that you can share with us? Nothing that I can share publicly, no, unfortunately. Pro Hiller says, I would like to replace our legacy merge and transactional replication. Google is full of solutions. Any recommendations? Architecture is kind of beyond something that I could do quickly in like a Twitch chat comment kind of thing. I will tell you that this is when people hire a consultant who's done it before. I am not pitching my services for replication because I don't solve that problem. That's just not what I focus on. But I would hire somebody who's done it before, just because that's the kind of thing that will haunt you for years after you do it. If you do it incorrectly, it can be very, very bad. So. Victor asks a query optimization question. That's kind of beyond what I can see without seeing the query, though. I would need to see the query on yours, Victor. Richard says, which features of SQL Server do you think are least used, which could be of a real benefit to businesses? For me, Columnstore indexes. When Columnstore indexes first came out in SQL Server 2012, they made the table read-only. So it was kind of like, you know how sometimes you'll see on comedy shows where there's a gun and people pull the trigger and a little flag comes out and it says bang? That's what Columnstore indexes were in SQL Server 2012. Microsoft was like, we've got Columnstore, and they pulled the trigger and they're like, but you make your table read-only. And we're like, really? You think you're going to rob a store with that? No, ain't nobody going to be impressed with that gun. But then in 2014, they got gradually better. And these days, 2016, 17, and 19, they're pretty good. You have to understand a lot of the limitations, which is why I'm starting to work on courseware for that now. But I've used that to make really big improvement differences at clients. So without having to change code, that's the other really amazing part. Next up. Oxalic acid says something I don't agree with. It says more skills is always better. I don't agree. I bet you've seen pictures of a one-man band. Just to Google it so we can see, put an example up on the screen, a one-man band. If we go and look for examples of that, so yep, that's perfect. So somebody like this. This guy is not going to tour with the Rolling Stones. This guy is not going to open for insert your favorite artist here. This is a solo contractor. This is a freelancer. That's okay if your customer is small businesses. If you want to go out to, like, say, doctor's offices or print shops and you want to solve their problem, you hire a guy like this. But if you want to work for Google, IBM, Stack Overflow, you're going to have to sharpen your knives and get a little deeper than this. Your drumming isn't going to be pulling a string every 10 seconds. You better be able to just do all kinds of amazing things with drumsticks, like eat them like chicken wings. So I would just say that more skills isn't always better. I know people who are jacks of all trades, and then when I ask a single slightly deep question about databases, they're like, I don't know. I'm like, yeah, you really don't know. But Oxalic added something else that I really love and agree with. He says, recommending a book, Learn DBA Tools in a Month of Lunches from Chrissy Lemaire and Rob Sewell. Yes, I highly recommend that. Next up, Chosen says, over on YouTube, Chosen says, I'm wondering how I can start my own business as a database specialist and not just work for one company 9 to 5. What you need to do is figure out how you're going to bring in lots of sales. You know, how are you going to get lots of people to contact you? Which really means blogging, presenting, doing web streaming. You want lots of people to see you in action. And I'll give you all a great example. There are like over 100 people inside the Twitch channel right now. I don't even know how many people are in the YouTube channel. Most of you aren't going to hire me. I know like 2 of you in here, because I recognize the names, actually did hire me or are on contract for and to do a SQL Critical Care in the near future. But that's a good idea of a reference. For like every 100 people I talk to on streams or blogs or whatever, 99.9 of them don't hire me. So it's the same thing with marketing. If you want to become a DBA specialist, you're going to have to reach out to a lot of people for every person who hires you. So, hey, Lisa, I said, hi, Lisa, thank you. Hey, very good. So you're going to have to reach out to a lot of people in order to get enough people to know you, people who actually have money. Because most of you here on the stream, this is also why I do streaming. A lot of y'all don't have, oh, wow, that's true too. Yeah. A lot of y'all don't have money, and that's why you're here, is that you want to get, people won't get their money approved by managers. So I want to help you by giving back to the community and this kind of thing too. But it's also me being very evil and planting a seed that if you ever do have money, you're going to give it all to me. And Basic says, more here are students. Absolutely. And I want to get people started on the right foot too, on their database career. Contact administrator need to ask if a row is logged with the computed column stuff. So you can go run and test that and see. You can do a begin tran and you can go look to see that kind of thing. Supal DBA says, maybe a stupid question. It's okay. They're all stupid questions. They're terrible. They're no good at all. Just absolutely bad. Oh, and you even sent it in twice. Damn, look at that. Oh, that's perfect timing. Alexi, good to see you. Alexi on Facebook. Okay, maybe there's a few people in here who are clients. And that's downtown San Diego. It's a little bit of a cloudy morning here for a start, but so Supal said, maybe a stupid question, can we store pictures and files in SQL Server? You can, but remember, SQL Server Standard Edition is $2,000 US per CPU core. Now, does that really make sense for a file server? No, go use a file server because it's way cheaper. And instead, give your money to me for SQL Server training. WC Dozer. Currently, I'm a network engineer. 90s. How do I convince my client rather than constantly blaming the network? Maybe hire a DBA to. So Dozer, let me make sure I understand your question here. You're saying that the client is paying you, and you want to convince your client to pay someone else instead. Is that what you're asking? You want to, that's interesting. Huh, maybe we should probably think through that a little bit there. Scrolling down. Oh, Sashin says, all the database servers that we support are on Amazon and Azure. To learn more about that, are there good resources you can point out? Yes. So if you search for, where did my mouse go? Azure training site, brenozar.com. I don't do Azure training, but I'm just going to give you the link to where it is. So if you search on Brenozar for new free Azure and SQL Server training from Microsoft, Microsoft's done a whole series of GitHub repos, YouTube videos, examples, all kinds of stuff, and it's all totally for free. I'll never do it because Microsoft gives away so much stuff for free and they lose money on it because Azure changes constantly and they have to keep updating their training. So I'd be an idiot to try to build training on that and lose my shirt, but Microsoft doesn't mind losing their shirt on your training, so there you go. Let's see. Santa says, I think I've heard that you are not a fan of Resource Governor in SQL Server. Why do you feel that it's bad? Oh, good question. So Resource Governor makes queries slower. It's not a joke. Resource Governor makes queries slower by taking away CPU and memory resources. I don't have a lot of people who are going, hey, Brent, can you give me a solution to make my queries run slower, please? I would really like some help. No, so what Resource Governor is good for is when you want to penalize some users and let other users go faster. Even then, I just never get requests like that. Clients, you know what clients say to me? Brent, can you make everything fast? All of it. We don't want any of it to go slow, please. We would like them all to be instantaneous. That's the kind of resource question that I get. That's why Resource Governor hasn't really worked out well for me. But if you have an instance where you need queries to go slower, Resource is your man. Jan says, is there any drawback of using Query Store in 2016 and after? Yes, it can cause your server to crash, can cause your availability groups not to be able to fail over. This is one of those features where you really want to read what's going on with the feature before you implement it. And there's one standard person There is one standard person to go look at, Erin Stellato. Erin Stellato Query Store. She's got courses on Pluralsight. She's got a great list of things like trace flags that you need to go put in before you adopt this feature. She is the person in our industry to teach you about Query Store. I don't have one slide about how to configure it. Jose, so that's a really interesting question. How do I feel about running SSIS on the same server as SQL Server? SSIS is really just like an application. The only thing that it shares with SQL Server is the name. When Microsoft wants to charge a lot of money for something, they put it in the same box as SQL Server. They're like, it's a free toy in the box. But the problem is that free toy costs you in terms of CPU, in terms of I/O, patching, all of those things. So just be careful when you put the free toy on your production box. Often from a performance perspective, you have to put it somewhere else. All right. So then someone has said down there, let me scroll down and see it, because someone said, you missed something about Resource Governor. David said, oh, you missed the point of Resource Governor in a production environment. Yes, I did miss the point. I don't have a lot of people going, please slow my production queries down. Is that what you were thinking? You were thinking I was against it in development, but I'm not against it in production? Are you out of your mind? Sue Paul says, can we restrict CPU per database? No. So Resource Governor lets you cap resources by people, by logins, by workload pools, etc. But if someone logs in under a different account and runs a query against that database from, say, TempDB, you can do cross-database queries. Resource Governor's like, I wish I could figure out a way to capture that. You sure do look pretty. Okay, so let's come back up to the question list. Field says, as a follow-up question to the one about Resource Governor, would you recommend changing the default memory grant as a default pool for a decision support server which has problems with complex queries? Generally, in decision support servers, I don't see a lot of people trying to run, say, 50 queries at the same time. Also, in decision support servers, usually the queries are terrible. So I'm not a fan of changing that default. David brings up a point. David says you don't want some people reusing resources and killing your machine. Then you get others complaining prod is slow. So David is saying you should use Resource Governor to make sure that things are slow all the time. David, you have a great point there. I see your point, and I can see why you like Resource Governor. Next one up. David's going to kill me. David's going to absolutely kill me. But I'm serious about that. Like, I've never seen a situation where people went, oh, it's okay for one user's queries to go slow, because politically, that one user who we throttled down, you know what they do is they go and get a real sharp knife. And then they go to the COO's office and they say, if you don't let my queries go faster again, I'm going to stab that DBA in the face. Like, usually a technical solution has political backfires. And when you slow someone's queries down, you end up getting knifed in the back. It isn't slow. Keep your stats good. Oh my God, you got to go to a training class. Go to show up to Mastering Server Tuning sometime. I'd love to show you how statistics will often not be anywhere near enough to solve query problems. Next up, let's see here. Oh, Tejareb says, I have a bunch of merge statements in a while loop for each market. Option recompile fixes this issue for me. Is it a bad idea? Option recompile is just kind of like a tool like any other tool. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. What I would say to people is, if the query runs less than once a minute, so like if it runs every 90 seconds or every 2 minutes, like if your loading queries are going through a loop and each one takes a minute or two, recompile can be fine. But if it runs more than once a minute, I start to ask questions. Like recompile on something that's running every second through in a loop, that can be a bad idea from a CPU perspective, because you have to build a new query plan each time. Nicholas asks, is there an easy way to track database usage, like monitor how much a database has changed between dates? Yes. Look at the transaction log backup sizes. If you look at the transaction log backup sizes, you'll be able to see how much of the database is changing, like how many transactions are happening. Now, you specifically asked for easy. You didn't ask for accurate, but that's an easy way to go and get it. Next up, let's see here. Oh, good one says, how do I benchmark a new server? How do I find the breaking point of the server? What you do is you take one of your junior developers and you ask them to go write a query on that server. Pretty soon you'll know the breaking point of that server. Business intelligence teams are also good for that exact purpose. Just kind of joking around there, but not really. If you want to run synthetic workloads, so synthetic workloads are like when you craft your own queries and go beat the daylights out of the server. You can with like TPC benchmarks. But the problem is you're telling the business, okay, so I ran against the server and its breaking point is 3 pieces of fried chicken. And they're like, but pieces of fried chicken don't really map to what we do with the database. And you're like, I know, but if you put 3 pieces of fried chicken in it, it's going to break. Instead, what you really want to do is you want to do whatever transactions that your business actually does against it. You want to have your developers run a repeatable load test of what your queries really are, so that instead of saying that the server's breaking point is 2 buckets of fried chicken and a cup of mashed potatoes, that it's 3,000 customers placing orders at a time. So that way it's something meaningful to your business. I actually don't want So the guru says, so using distributed replay, I don't want, perfect segue, I don't want people testing queries, because what happens is that your queries change all the time. Your developers are constantly changing, adding new queries in, changing the way the queries work, changing database level settings, all kinds of things. So because of that, I would rather have the application developers push a load through their server, point it at my brand new server, and then that way I'll have a better picture of the entire stack instead of just making up 13 pieces of fried chicken, which is essentially what distributed load testing is, distributed replay is, because you're testing yesterday's app, not today's. Next up, let's see here. G-Surgeon says, I have some code in a stored procedure that has to query the DMVs. Since I have view server state, the code worked, but some users did not have that and the code failed. Is there a way to do this without granting rights? Yes. So the way to do it is by signing a stored procedure. Brent? By signing a stored procedure. So the SP Blitz First documentation gives you instructions on how to do that. If you search for SP Blitz First, how to grant permission to non-DBAs, I've got an exact example in there. Plus I link to Erland Sommerskog's post on granting permissions via certificates. This is a great technique. I use this all the time to give my junior people permissions to do things like killing sessions, doing database restores, and things like that. So SP Blitz First's documentation on how to grant permissions to non-DBAs. Let's see here. Carithavan says, thanks, you're welcome. Kathiravan says, please suggest any good book to learn about SQL internals. Really the one that's on sale. SQL Server internals, a lot of the basic stuff, because you're asking for your first book. A lot of the basic stuff hasn't changed in 20 years. So whatever book you find available really cheaply, just go start there and roll from there. Jan says, do you have any differences in SQL Server's performance between different disk sector sizes? You'll find a lot of advice out there on the web that's very dated. The problem is it's completely dependent on your storage subsystem. Different storage subsystems perform differently internally. Some do shared storage, some do dedicated storage. So it depends so much on your storage subsystem that you would have to benchmark in your own one. I almost never get 2 clients with the same storage subsystems back to back, so I haven't bothered blogging about it. All right, and then the last one that we'll take before we call it a break for today. Let's see here. I'll go through a few of these. Jesus says, is log shipping the best approach in upgrading a SQL server with a minimum outage? I love log shipping because it also gives you the ability to go across AGs. Like I can have two different availability groups with two different versions. Log shipping helps make that a whole lot easier, whereas going like cross database availability or cross cluster availability groups is kind of painful right now. So huge fan of log shipping. Plus, it gives me a really nice backout plan whenever things go wrong because the original server is still exactly the way it is. All right, that is everything for today. We'll call that a wrap. And then I'll do this exact same thing next week. I'm in here every weekend on Twitch. I'm in on Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, Saturdays and Sundays. I'm in for next Saturday as well. Next Saturday, let me go look. Our first hour, I think, is open questions. And then that's not true. The first hour of Saturdays is going to be what's new in SQL Server 2019, 100% demos. Because I'm doing that for SQL Saturday Gothenburg, I'm going to be live streaming at both my Twitch and YouTube and Facebook, and then also SQL Saturday Gothenburg. And then after that first hour, I'll switch over and do open Q&A. So thanks y'all for hanging out, and I will see y'all next time. Adios.